In the vastness of the galaxy there were many planets, some rich with life, others barren and lifeless. Among these, Earth was often overlooked, a quiet, seemingly insignificant world in a small, unremarkable corner of the universe. To the galaxy's most powerful empire, Earth had always been labeled as a low-threat planet. The empire, known for conquering and controlling countless civilizations, had long ignored this small world. It was not seen as a danger, not even a challenge. For centuries, the empire had focused on more dangerous planets, worlds filled with advanced technologies or strong, warlike species. They had their sights set on the stars, seeking to expand their control and bring everything under their rule. Earth, with its primitive humans, was nothing to worry about. They were still stuck on their own little blue planet, fighting among themselves and struggling to reach the stars. There was nothing about Earth that suggested it could ever be a threat. Yet something strange had happened. The Empire, which had always kept a watchful eye on the universe, had recently gone silent. The communication channels that once buzzed with reports and observations about different planets had stopped when it came to Earth. It was as if the Empire had simply forgotten about the small world, leaving it to exist without their attention. This wasn't normal. The Empire never left a planet unchecked for long. Every planet was monitored, categorized, and labeled with a threat level, and Earth had always been a low threat. But the silence wasn't the only odd thing. There were whispers among the Empire's highest officials. A few of them had begun to question Earth's true status. Some even wondered if the Empire had made a mistake. What if Earth wasn't as harmless as it appeared? What if there was something hidden beneath the surface? These questions slowly began to circulate, but they remained only rumors. No one had concrete answers. The Empire had long ago stopped paying attention to Earth, and that was a decision no one seemed willing to revisit. Still, despite the silence, Earth's people continued their daily lives. They were unaware of the Empire's indifference. To them, life was simple. Too simple, according to the Empire's standards. Humans fought wars, built cities, and explored their world, but none of it seemed to pose any real threat. Their technology was primitive by galactic standards, and their civilizations were often divided and unstable. Nothing suggested they could pose a danger to anything, let alone a massive galactic empire. But, as strange as it was, Earth's low-threat status was beginning to shift. The Empire's silence was not just the result of neglect. It was becoming something more. Unseen by the Empire's watchful eyes, humanity was changing. The humans, despite their weaknesses and imperfections, were showing signs of something unexpected. Resilience. The quiet planet had long been a place of conflict and struggle. Earth's history was full of wars, disagreements, and countless moments of human suffering. But what the Empire had failed to realize was that these very struggles had forged something powerful within Earth's inhabitants. The constant battles for survival had made humans stronger, more adaptable, and more inventive than the Empire had ever imagined. The very things that made Earth appear weak were actually the building blocks of its strength. The Empire's high-ranking officials, sitting comfortably in their grand citadels, had no idea of this growing power. They saw only the surface, a planet of divided nations, primitive technologies, and frequent wars. They didn't see the incredible willpower that surged beneath the chaos. Earth's humans had a spark, a fire within them that no one could predict, and that was something the Empire had missed. Yet even as whispers of Earth's potential began to grow, the Empire remained silent. There was no change in their approach, no new reports, no missions sent to investigate this mysterious world. The silence grew deeper, more unsettling, and that silence, more than anything else, would prove to be Earth's greatest advantage. Little did the Empire know, this quiet planet had more to offer than anyone could have imagined. It wasn't just another low-threat world. It was a sleeping giant, and soon it would awaken. The Empire would soon learn the truth behind Earth's quiet facade, and it would come at a cost. But for now, Earth remained a mystery, a planet no one thought twice about. A planet whose true potential was hidden in plain sight, waiting to be discovered by those who dared to look deeper. And for those who would listen, Earth's story was just beginning. For centuries, the galaxy's most powerful empire had been on a relentless mission to conquer and control. Their vast fleet of ships, advanced technologies, and well-trained forces had allowed them to sweep through countless star systems. The Empire's strategy was simple: assess the threat level of each planet and decide whether to engage. Planets with high potential for resistance or advanced technology were dealt with quickly and decisively. Lesser worlds, like Earth, were ignored, their potential dismissed as insignificant. The Empire had a system for categorizing planets, a detailed and highly classified process. Each planet was studied thoroughly: its resources, its inhabitants, and most importantly, its potential to challenge the Empire. A planet's military strength, technological progress, and the unity of its species were all measured. Those deemed a threat were swiftly neutralized. Those considered harmless were marked as low threat and placed on a list of planets to be left alone. Earth, from the very beginning, had been assigned to the low threat category. The humans, with their basic technology and constant internal conflicts, seemed incapable of posing any challenge to the Empire. Their world was small, their reach limited. The alien Empire had long watched from afar, observing Earth's progress, but never taking it seriously. The humans were still stuck in the past, divided by nations, fighting over resources and land. They had no unifying force to propel them forward, no vision of a galaxy-spanning future. They were just another species among millions, struggling to survive on their tiny blue planet. In the Empire's eyes, Earth was a world of little consequence. Its people were primitive in comparison to the vast civilizations of the galaxy. The Empire's scientists had observed their limited advancements in technology: small rockets, crude machines, and weapons that could barely break through their own atmosphere. The humans were constantly at war with themselves, fighting over borders and ideologies, never uniting under a common banner. It seemed that Earth's future would always remain constrained to their tiny corner of the universe. For centuries, the Empire's leaders paid no real attention to Earth. The Empire's focus was on the stars, on conquering new worlds and expanding their influence. Earth, with its history of division and weakness, didn't even register on the Empire's radar. The beings that ruled the Empire were ancient, wise, and powerful. They had seen it all before. Dozens of planets like Earth filled with species that fought among themselves and were easily conquered. In their eyes, Earth was just another world that would eventually fall in line once the humans had advanced, enough to be noticed. But something had changed. There was a shift, a disturbance in the Empire's calculations. Slowly, over time, the reports that once flowed about Earth had stopped. The regular updates that came from the Empire's network of observers had vanished. No more intelligence reports, no more communications from their scouts. The silence was unsettling. At first, it was dismissed as a simple oversight. Perhaps the planet was just too far from the Empire's reach to bother with. But as time passed, it became clear that something was wrong. The Empire's leaders, those who had once dismissed Earth as insignificant, began to notice the growing gap in their reports. A few high-ranking officials quietly raised concerns. They wondered why, after so many years of watching Earth, no new information was being gathered. It was as though the planet had simply disappeared from the Empire's radar. At the same time, whispers started circulating among the Empire's scientists. A few of them had begun to look deeper into Earth's potential. They wondered if the Empire had made a mistake by ignoring the planet for so long. What if Earth wasn't as harmless as it appeared? What if the humans had hidden strengths, abilities, or technologies that the Empire had never fully understood? It was a question that began to gnaw at the minds of the more curious minds within the Empire. The truth was, Earth's low-threat status was more of an assumption than a fact. The Empire had never truly studied the humans in depth, never fully understood their resilience. What the Empire failed to realize was that Earth was a world shaped by constant adversity, by challenges that had forced its inhabitants to evolve in ways that the Empire couldn't comprehend. The humans, despite their primitive technology, had developed something far more dangerous: determination. The Empire's leaders had underestimated the power of human will. Earth's inhabitants had faced countless obstacles: war, disease, poverty, and natural disasters. But through it all, they had continued to survive. They had adapted, learned, and grown. Humans had a unique ability to bounce back from the harshest of circumstances, and this resilience was something the Empire had failed to account for. The very nature of humanity, its drive to keep pushing forward, despite the odds, made them a dangerous species in ways that were not immediately obvious. But this discovery came too late. The Empire, too wrapped up in its own dominance, had ignored the one thing that made Earth unique. Now, as the Empire's attention slowly began to turn toward the small blue planet, it was clear that Earth's low-threat status was no longer valid. The question was no longer whether Earth could be conquered. It was whether the Empire could maintain control over a species that had proven time and time again that it could overcome any obstacle. The Empire's silence, once seen as a sign of indifference, was now a sign of fear. The leaders of the Empire were realizing that they had misjudged Earth, and this realization would soon send shockwaves through the galaxy. Earth, once a planet to be ignored, was now a puzzle that needed to be solved. And as the Empire's silence deepened, one thing became certain: the humans of Earth were not as powerless as they had once thought. The silence that had settled over Earth was not just a mere absence of communication. It was the beginning of something much more unsettling. The alien Empire, which had long monitored the planet from afar, had stopped their regular transmissions. No more reports, no more intelligence, and no more updates about the little blue world. It was as if Earth had ceased to exist in the Empire's grand plan. This silence, however, was not something the Empire had planned for. As the years went by, this lack of communication began to cause concern among the Empire's highest officials. The decision to place Earth in the low-threat category had been made long ago, and for good reason. The humans were divided, their technology primitive, and their potential far from the reach of the Empire's advanced forces. In the eyes of the Empire, Earth was simply a planet to be left alone, a place that posed no danger. But as the silence stretched on, something began to feel wrong. It wasn't just that Earth had been forgotten. It was that the lack of information was becoming troubling. Normally, even the most distant planets were watched, their progress and activity constantly observed by the Empire's vast network of scouts and informants. But Earth was different. No reports were coming in, and this absence was not typical. The Empire's leaders, many of whom had dismissed Earth as irrelevant, began to question their assumptions. Was Earth really as insignificant as they had believed? Could there be something on that world that the Empire had missed? One particular officer stationed at a high command post in the Empire's core systems began to grow suspicious. Unlike the others, who were content to dismiss Earth as nothing more than a distant backwater, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the planet than met the eye. His curiosity grew, and he began to dig deeper into the history of Earth's surveillance data, looking for patterns, anomalies, anything that could explain the sudden silence. What he found was nothing short of extraordinary. The Empire's records showed the same thing over and over. Earth had been marked as a low threat for centuries. But when he reviewed older reports, something strange began to stand out. Small, seemingly insignificant events began to catch his attention. There were signs of unexpected resistance, brief moments where humans, in the face of overwhelming odds, had shown incredible resilience. There were accounts of humans who, in the most dire of situations, had found ways to adapt and survive. These weren't large-scale events, but they were curious. In one of the older reports, an alien scout had described a particular incident on Earth, an event where a small group of humans had managed to outwit a much stronger adversary, a force that was far more advanced technologically. The humans had used their ingenuity to survive. The officer noticed a pattern in these reports. Over time, these small instances of human resilience seemed to be growing in number. This was no coincidence. The officer, driven by his growing curiosity, requested permission from the Empire's high command to send a new reconnaissance mission to Earth. He argued that something was happening on the planet, something that the Empire's initial observations had failed to catch. He believed that the human race had evolved in ways that had gone unnoticed. He pointed out that Earth was no longer a passive world. It was becoming a place where unexpected things were happening, things that could change the balance of power in the galaxy. At first, his request was met with skepticism. After all, Earth had been written off as a low priority for centuries. The Empire had more important matters to attend to, and Earth was a distant, irrelevant planet in the grand scheme of things. But the officer's persistence paid off. Reluctantly, High Command granted his request. A new team was sent to Earth, not just to observe, but to gather real-time intelligence on the humans and their world. When the team arrived on Earth, what they found shocked them. The humans, despite their lack of advanced technology, were more capable than the Empire had imagined. The planet, though still divided and often chaotic, was full of people who had developed a unique set of skills, adaptability, creativity, and an almost boundless determination to survive. Earth's people had a quality that the Empire hadn't considered, the ability to endure hardship and rise above it. The reconnaissance team began to observe the humans in action. They saw how humans, in the face of great adversity, could quickly adapt to new challenges. They had developed survival instincts unlike any other species the Empire had encountered. It wasn't their technology that made them dangerous. It was their ability to fight, to innovate, and to grow stronger even in the harshest of conditions. One of the most surprising things the team discovered was Earth's capacity for unity. Despite their divisions, when faced with a common threat, humans had an uncanny ability to come together. Whether it was in times of natural disasters or during periods of global conflict, the humans showed an unusual strength to cooperate, to fight together for their survival. This was something the Empire hadn't anticipated. They had always seen Earth as divided, as a planet torn apart by its own internal struggles. But they were beginning to realize that this very division had forged a strength in the humans that no one had expected. The silence from the Empire's leadership only deepened as these discoveries came to light. The reports from Earth were unlike anything they had ever anticipated. The more the reconnaissance team observed, the more they realized that Earth's low threat status was based on outdated information. The planet had grown, had changed in ways that the Empire had failed to see. Now the question was no longer whether Earth posed a threat, but how the Empire would respond to this new reality. The silence that had once been comforting to the Empire now felt ominous. The leadership could no longer ignore Earth's potential. The Empire had miscalculated, and the truth was undeniable. Earth was no longer the insignificant planet they had once thought it to be. The Empire's leaders were faced with a dilemma: continue to ignore Earth and risk underestimating its true capabilities, or take action before it was too late. The decision would have consequences far beyond what they could foresee, and as the Empire grappled with this new reality, one thing was clear: Earth was no longer a low-threat planet. It was a wild card, and in the vast galaxy of predictable outcomes that made it more dangerous than anything the Empire had ever encountered. As the Empire's reconnaissance team continued their mission on Earth, they uncovered more details that only deepened the mystery. The small, seemingly insignificant world was not as helpless as the Empire had believed. There was something about the humans, something hidden beneath the surface, that made them far more capable than anyone had imagined. The first major discovery came from Earth's natural environment. Despite being a relatively young planet, Earth's ecosystems were incredibly diverse and complex. The team observed how, time and time again, the planet's species managed to adapt and survive in ways that were nothing short of remarkable. Earth's animals, its plants, and even the weather itself had forced its inhabitants to find ways to endure, to live in harmony with an unpredictable environment. Humans, it seemed, were no different. What struck the reconnaissance team the most was the humans' uncanny ability to solve problems. It wasn't their technology that stood out, it was their creativity. Even with the most basic tools, humans could innovate. They could take simple materials and turn them into something useful. Their minds worked in ways that the Empire hadn't anticipated. They were always looking for new ways to overcome challenges. constantly pushing the boundaries of what was possible with limited resources. One of the team's observers described how a small group of humans, facing a severe drought, had managed to create a system to collect water from the air. With no advanced technology or resources, they had found a way to gather moisture from the atmosphere and make it drinkable. This was just one example of how the humans' ingenuity had allowed them to survive in the face of what should have been an impossible situation. It became increasingly clear that Earth's greatest strength wasn't its technology, it was its people. The humans had learned to rely on each other, to work together in ways that made them stronger. They didn't just survive in the face of adversity, they thrived. The more the reconnaissance team observed, the more they realized that the Empire had underestimated the power of human unity. Even when faced with internal divisions, humans had an extraordinary ability to come together when there was a larger threat. The team witnessed it during a massive global event, one that involved millions of humans. Despite the chaos, despite the lack of communication between different nations, humans found a way to cooperate. They shared resources, knowledge, and skills to overcome challenges that would have broken a lesser species. This unexpected cooperation became one of the most surprising findings of the mission. The team also noted that the humans had a remarkable ability to recover from failure. It wasn't just their creativity that allowed them to advance, it was their resilience. Every time they fell, they picked themselves back up. Their history was full of struggles, from wars to disease to natural disasters, and yet they had continued to move forward. They had learned from their mistakes, adapted to their changing world, and rebuilt themselves each time they were knocked down. The Empire had never seen such a pattern of growth before. Most species, once defeated, stayed defeated, but humans kept rising. Even more astonishing was their ability to change the world around them. It wasn't just their inventions that stood out, but their ability to change the very fabric of their society. Over time, they had restructured their governments, built new forms of cooperation, and formed alliances that crossed borders. They had created systems that allowed them to organize on a global scale, overcoming the divisions that had once torn them apart. The Empire's leadership had never anticipated such adaptability from a species that seemed so chaotic at first glance. As the reconnaissance team gathered more data, the Empire's officials back home began to realize that Earth was no longer a planet to be ignored. It wasn't just that the humans were surviving, they were thriving, they were evolving, and they were doing so with remarkable speed. The Empire had thought they had all the time in the world to address Earth, but the truth was becoming clear. Earth was not stagnant. It was growing in ways that the Empire had never seen before. The decision to ignore Earth was looking more and more like a mistake. The reconnaissance team sent back their reports, detailing the humans' incredible adaptability, their technological progress, and their unity in the face of adversity. There was no denying it. Earth had the potential to become something far greater than anyone had expected. The Empire could no longer afford to dismiss the planet as a low threat. But what truly unsettled the Empire's leadership was the realization that Earth had not only survived, despite the odds, it had learned to leverage its own weaknesses. The very things that made it seem like an easy target had become its greatest strength. Its divided nations, once seen as a weakness, had taught the humans how to adapt, how to work together even in the face of conflict. Their inability to unify under a single banner had paradoxically made them stronger in their ability to cooperate on a larger scale. The Empire's officials began to worry. Could the humans of Earth eventually pose a threat to them? It was a question no one had considered, and now, with the evidence mounting, it was clear that Earth was far from harmless. The Empire's previous calculations, which had deemed Earth a low threat, were becoming obsolete. The humans' ability to adapt, to innovate, and to unite when needed made them a species that could no longer be ignored. As the Empire's leadership processed the new data, the silence from their leadership grew even more oppressive. The reconnaissance mission had opened a door to a new understanding of Earth, one that the Empire was not prepared for. But now that the truth was out, the question remained: what would the Empire do about it? How would they handle a planet that had already shown the capacity to change, to grow, and to surprise them in ways they had never expected. As the Empire's leaders began to digest the data from Earth, the realization set in: Earth was no longer just a small, insignificant planet. The more they learned about the humans, the more they understood that underestimating them had been their gravest mistake. The Empire had always viewed themselves as the pinnacle of power, their vast fleets and advanced technologies making them almost untouchable. They had ruled over countless worlds, each more advanced than Earth. And yet, Earth was different. The humans had something unique, a quality that was difficult to understand and even harder to measure. What had initially seemed like a chaotic, divided species now appeared far more resilient and capable than the Empire had ever imagined. They had a drive, a will to survive that set them apart from other species the Empire had encountered. They were not just struggling to live, they were thriving, constantly improving, and evolving in ways that defied expectations. The Empire's leadership was now torn. On one hand, there were those who still believed that Earth was a manageable, low-priority planet. They argued that the humans had no advanced technology, and that their internal struggles would eventually keep them from uniting as a threat. But the other side, the more cautious members of the leadership, saw a different picture. They saw humans who had found ways to adapt to their environment, to overcome obstacles, and to unite when necessary. The humans had demonstrated an extraordinary capacity for survival, and that was something the Empire could not ignore. The question on everyone's mind was whether Earth would one day be strong enough to challenge the Empire. The more the Empire's intelligence officers studied Earth's growth, the more they realized that the humans had begun to develop in ways that went beyond just technological advancement. They had created networks, systems of communication and collaboration that were spreading across the globe. Their ability to share knowledge, to unite against common challenges, was growing stronger by the day. The Empire's scientists had begun to examine Earth's technological developments more closely, and what they found surprised them. While humans had not reached the same level of sophistication as the Empire, they had something the Empire had overlooked: innovation. It wasn't just about having the most advanced weapons or ships. It was about being able to take the tools at hand and use them in creative ways to solve problems. The humans had mastered this art. There were reports of human inventors who, with limited resources, had created machines that could change the course of their history. They had developed new methods of communication, new technologies for harnessing energy, and even ways to heal wounds that had once been thought impossible to treat. These advancements, while still crude compared to the Empire's own technology, were signs of a species that was rapidly catching up to the rest of the galaxy. But what truly worried the Empire was the growing unity among the humans. Despite their divisions, they had learned to cooperate in the face of global challenges. They had formed alliances, built coalitions, and created systems of governance that, though imperfect, allowed them to organize on a global scale. This was something the Empire had not anticipated. The humans, who had once seemed so fractured, were beginning to pull together. The leadership within the Empire knew that the humans were not ready to challenge them yet. Earth was still far behind technologically and politically, but the speed at which the humans were progressing was unprecedented. The Empire had conquered countless worlds, each one more advanced than Earth. Yet none of those planets had ever developed the same resilience, the same drive to evolve and adapt. The humans had something that made them unpredictable, a quality that was difficult to quantify but impossible to ignore. In the quiet halls of the Empire's high command, a debate raged. Some argued that the humans should be left alone, that their slow progress could be allowed to continue until they posed no real threat. After all, Earth was just one world among many in the vast empire. But others feared that if the humans were left unchecked, they might eventually become a force too strong to ignore. The Empire had always believed that power came from strength, from advanced technology and military might. But the humans were showing that power could come from something else entirely: their ability to survive, to unite, and to innovate. 1. High-ranking officer, a scientist who had been involved in the initial studies of Earth, stood before the Empire's council, presenting his findings. He argued that the Empire had failed to see Earth's true potential. While the humans were still far behind in terms of technology, they had the capacity to grow in ways the Empire had not anticipated. They had the potential to adapt and evolve, faster than any species the Empire had ever encountered. If we wait too long, the officer warned, Earth will not just catch up to us, it will surpass us. The humans are learning at an exponential rate. They may not have our weapons or our ships, but they have something we cannot predict, their will to survive. The council was silent. The officer's words hung in the air like a heavy weight. The silence from Earth, which had once been seen as a comfort, now felt like a warning. The Empire's leadership knew that they had been wrong about Earth, but the question remained, what should they do about it? Some argued that it was too early to take action. Earth was still a long way from posing any real threat. They were still divided, their technology still primitive, but others believed the Empire could no longer afford to wait. They feared that, if they did, the humans might one day rise up not with the Empire's advanced weapons but with something far more dangerous, their own ingenuity and their unity. The decision was made, but it wasn't an easy one. The Empire had been too focused on their own power, too sure of their superiority, to truly understand the species they had dismissed for so long, but the humans were not to be underestimated any longer. The Empire could not afford to wait until it was too late. As the decision was made to take action, the quiet, unassuming world of Earth was no longer seen as a low-threat planet. It was now considered a wild card, a species with untapped potential that could change the course of the galaxy. The Empire had underestimated Earth, and now they would have to face the consequences of their mistake. The silence from Earth had become deafening, and for the first time in centuries the Empire was unsure of how to respond. As the Empire's high command deliberated over their next steps, the unease surrounding Earth reached new heights. The quiet, once comforting silence now seemed like the calm before an unexpected storm. The leaders of the Empire had underestimated Earth for so long, but now, with the humans demonstrating remarkable adaptability, the question wasn't whether Earth could rise to power. It was how long could the Empire continue to ignore them before it was too late. The Empire had ruled over countless worlds, each with its own unique traits and challenges. But Earth had always been different. Its humans, though divided and often chaotic, were beginning to show signs of something extraordinary. There was a quiet strength in them that no one had anticipated. As they continued to evolve, they were developing systems of cooperation that transcended the boundaries that had once kept them apart. The Empire's leaders began to realize that the greatest threat from Earth was not a military force nor an advanced weapon. It was the humans' relentless drive to improve, to unite, and to innovate. In the quiet chambers of the Empire's council, the decision was made to finally take action. It wasn't a decision made lightly. There was a growing faction within the leadership that believed Earth posed a real risk to the Empire, and that risk would only grow with time. They feared that the longer the Empire waited, the more advanced Earth would become and the harder it would be to control. There were still those who clung to the old belief that Earth was too primitive to pose any real danger, but they were growing fewer with each passing day. The new mission was clear. The Empire would send a team to Earth, not to observe or simply monitor the humans, but to infiltrate, to understand how they had evolved so quickly and, most importantly, to ensure that they remained under the Empire's control. Earth would no longer be left alone. It was time to act before the humans grew, stronger than they ever could have imagined. Meanwhile, on Earth, the humans were blissfully unaware of the Empire's looming presence. They continued to innovate, to adapt, and to grow. The systems of cooperation they had built were becoming more sophisticated, their global networks of knowledge sharing expanding. They were building new technologies, forming new partnerships, and learning from their past mistakes. The planet was far from perfect, but in many ways the humans were on the cusp of something incredible, a new age of unity and progress. What the Empire didn't yet realize was that the very nature of Earth's growth was a reflection of its people's resilience. The humans had learned the hard way that survival was not just about individual strength, but about collective action. Their past struggles, from wars to natural disasters, had taught them how to rebuild from the ashes. They had learned how to come together in times of crisis, and it was this ability to unite in the face of adversity that made them so formidable. The Empire's intelligence network had gathered all the information it could about Earth's progress, but there was one thing it couldn't account for: the humans' ability to adapt in ways that were entirely unpredictable. They had become experts in solving problems not just with technology, but with creativity, collaboration, and a deep understanding of their environment. Earth had become a place where innovation flourished, where new ideas were constantly emerging, and where people were finding ways to connect across vast distances and differences. The Empire's plan to infiltrate Earth began to take shape. The goal was not to conquer the planet, but to subdue it. They would learn from the humans, understand what made them so resilient, and find ways to keep them in check. There was no longer any question of whether Earth would pose a threat. It was about how to prevent that threat from becoming real. As the Empire's mission unfolded, the humans continued to evolve, each new discovery bringing them closer to a tipping point. The changes happening on Earth were not just technological, they were cultural, social, and even philosophical. Humans were starting to understand their true potential, and that understanding was changing everything. The old divisions that had once torn their world apart were slowly giving way to new forms of cooperation. The barriers between nations, religions, and cultures were becoming less important as humans learned to think and act on a global scale. What the Empire didn't realize was that in their efforts to control Earth, they had underestimated the very thing that made humanity so powerful: their ability to innovate and find solutions in even the most unlikely of places. The more the Empire observed, the more they understood that the real strength of Earth's people was not in their technology, but in their minds and hearts. They had a way of coming together, of thinking outside the box, of finding answers in places no one else had looked, and that was what truly terrified the Empire. As the mission to Earth progressed, the Empire's leadership began to feel the pressure mounting. Every report from the field was a reminder of just how close the humans were to achieving something extraordinary. The more the Empire tried to control the situation, the more they realized that they were facing an enemy they didn't fully understand. The humans were not an easy target. They were not like the other civilizations the Empire had conquered. They were unpredictable, resourceful, and relentlessly determined. It wasn't just their innovations that posed a threat. It was their spirit. The Empire had always relied on their vast resources, their superior technology, and their immense power. But the humans were showing that even the most powerful empire in the galaxy could be challenged by something far more intangible: the will of a determined people, united by a shared goal and an unbreakable drive to survive. And as the Empire's plans for Earth unfolded, they realized that they had overlooked the one thing that had always set humanity apart: their ability to defy expectations. The Empire had spent so long underestimating Earth, assuming that it was a planet of little consequence, that they hadn't seen the truth until it was almost too late. The humans were no longer the underdogs. They were becoming a force to be reckoned with, and the Empire was left wondering, had they waited too long? Had they allowed a species they considered insignificant to grow into something that could change the fate of the galaxy? In the end, it wasn't just about the technology or the weapons. It was about the people. The Empire had been too focused on the wrong things, too focused on the surface, while the true strength of Earth lay in the hearts and minds of its people. And as the Empire looked down on the small blue planet, they began to realize that perhaps it wasn't Earth that needed to be subdued, but their own preconceived notions that needed to be torn down.